It was a warm September afternoon in Santa Fe when I pulled up in front of the old adobe house, the same one I spent every summer in growing up. The porch swing still creaked in the wind, and the smell of rosemary from the front garden wrapped around me like a half-forgotten dream. But the warmth I remembered didn't greet me. It felt vacant, like a song missing its melody. I hadn't been here in nearly 2 years, not because I didn't want to be, but because I was told there was no one left to visit. When the front door opened, it wasn't with a hug, it was with a voice sharp enough to slice the air. "Well, look who decided to come back," my grandmother said. Her silver hair was pinned neatly like always, but her arms were crossed and her expression was steel. Her name is Miriam, but I never called her anything but Nana. Until that moment, I thought I still could. "Nana, I froze. The words felt too small for the weight in the air. "I thought you were in a care home. They told me you and Grandpa were moved out after his fall." She raised one trembling hand. That single motion hit harder than a slap. "Your grandfather called for you, Isla, over and over, on his last day. Said he needed his little inventor. But you never showed. You never even called." I nearly stumbled. "That's not true. Nana, I didn't even know he was sick. I never got a call. No one told me anything." She eyed me like she couldn't decide whether to cry or spit. "They said you changed your number. Didn't want to be bothered." My voice cracked. I haven't changed my number since high school. She disappeared into the living room without another word. When she came back, she handed me an old notepad, the kind Grandpa always carried in his pocket for quick ideas. I saw his handwriting immediately, but the number, it wasn't mine. Not even close. This isn't me," I whispered. Her face paled. "But your mother said—" "I came home last year during fall break. I interrupted rage rising. I stopped by here." Vanessa opened the door. "She said you'd moved, said no one was home." Nana's hands started shaking. "We were here. Isla, we never moved." It hit me like a punch to the chest. "They lied to me," I said, my breath catching. "They cut me off from you. They made sure I couldn't say goodbye." She blinked rapidly, like trying to process a wave that had already crashed. "They told everyone you didn't care," she said. "That you said we were embarrassing. That you were focused on your new life and didn't want us around." I sank down onto the porch steps, feeling the weight of 1,000 missed moments crush my chest. I got the funeral time from Mom. She said it was at 1 p.m. I showed up at the church. It was empty. Nana sat beside me slowly. We buried him at 9 a.m. My throat closed up. My hands trembled. I missed it. I missed him. Her eyes filled, but she didn't sob. She just reached over and took my hand like she used to when I'd skin my knee chasing lizards in the backyard. "We know the truth now," she whispered. "He knows Isla. Somewhere he knows." I didn't know how long we sat there, wrapped in wind and regret. But when she stood, she moved like someone with unfinished business. She walked inside and picked up the landline on the wall. Her voice was sharp again. "Jody, I need you, Colin, and Vanessa at the house, now." A muffled reply tried to resist. "No," Nana said. "This isn't optional." Then she hung up and turned to me with a calm that could crack stone. "The lawyer will be here in an hour. Your grandfather left a few instructions, and they're going to hear them." I just nodded. I wasn't ready, but I was done being silent. I stayed in the kitchen, pacing between the sink and the old window that faced the orchard. The same orchard where Grandpa used to hang wind chimes from the trees just because he liked the way they sounded in the breeze. Everything looked smaller now. Or maybe I'd just grown. From the other room, I heard the front door open, then voices. My mother's sugary voice rang out first. "Mom, what's this all about? You sounded so tense." Then my father's practiced calm. "We just want to understand what's going on." And finally, Vanessa. Her voice bored and clipped. "I had to cancel a nail appointment for this, so it better be important." I wanted to laugh. Of course she had. Then silence. And then Nana's voice sharp as ever. "Take a seat. Mr. Hayward's here to read David's will." That was my cue. I stepped into the living room. 3 heads turned, and everything about their expressions screamed surprise wasn't part of the plan. Mom blinked fast, trying to realign her smile. Dad's jaw tensed. Vanessa. She looked like she'd seen a ghost in last season's outfit. What are you doing here?" My mother asked each word slow, like she'd rehearsed it but forgot the lines halfway through. Nana didn't give them a second to spiral. She gestured toward a man in a gray suit sitting by the fireplace, a thin leather briefcase on his lap. "This is Mr. Hayward, your grandfather's attorney." He cleared his throat and opened the case like it held more than just paper, like it carried consequences. "I, David T. Adler, being of sound mind and firm conviction, do hereby declare this my last will and testament." The room held its breath. "To my beloved wife, Miriam, I leave our home, our assets held in trust, and the full rights to the Adler Ranch property." Nana didn't flinch. She knew this already. She didn't need validation. Mr. Hayward continued. "To my granddaughter, Isla Adler. I leave the Adler Research Barn and all its contents, equipment, intellectual property, and an ongoing development fund of $400,000 to pursue any scientific or agricultural innovation she sees fit." Dead silence. Vanessa shifted in her seat. "To Isla, I also leave my personal journals, field notes, and a locked safe inside the barn. She'll know the code." I felt my chest tighten. I did know the code. It was my birthday. The one they forgot more often than not. And finally, he said, "The remaining estate investments, bank accounts, and stocks shall be divided equally between Isla and Vanessa Adler." Vanessa laughed. One sharp, humorless sound. "You've got to be kidding me," she snapped. "The barn, the journals, the money. This is a joke, right?" "No," Nana said. "It's justice." Vanessa stood up, arms flailing. She wasn't even here. She abandoned him. "I visited. I played piano for him. I brought soup." "You brought soup when we told you to," Nana said coolly. "You took selfies and left after 10 minutes. My mom finally found her voice. "Isla," she began, "honey, maybe you misunderstood." "No," I said, stepping forward. "You lied. You told me they were in a care facility. You said no visitors were allowed. You changed the funeral time. You made sure I missed every goodbye." My dad sighed like a man inconvenienced at a board meeting. "Isla, we had to protect your future. You were under pressure school research. There wasn't room for distraction." "You mean love?" I said. "There wasn't room for love." I hadn't planned to cry, but my throat burned. I swallowed hard. I wouldn't let them see me cry. Not now. Vanessa scoffed. "You always thought you were so special. Grandpa's favorite little genius. Just because you won some school medals and made potato batteries. I built a working irrigation system at 15 that was adopted by local farmers," I said. "You were the one who cheated on your biology final." She turned red. "That's not—" "I helped you pass it," I said, voice calm. "You begged me." Enough. Nana's voice cut through the room like a blade. She reached into the drawer next to her and pulled out a sealed letter. It was thick. The paper yellowed at the corners. "David asked for this to be read after the will." Mr. Hayward opened it with a small silver letter opener and began reading. "To my Isla, my little architect of dreams." I closed my eyes. "If you're hearing this, it means I've left this world, but I want you to know something. I never once believed you didn't care. They told me you stopped calling. I didn't believe them. When my calls went unanswered, I still left voicemails. When I didn't get letters, I wrote anyway. You are not the one who abandoned me, Isla. You were taken." I opened my eyes. My mother looked away. "You were always different. Not difficult different. The kind of different the world needs, and the kind of different small people try to erase." I could feel every breath in the room. "You didn't get the praise you deserved. You were overlooked, sidelined, silenced. But I saw you, always. And I built that barn not as a gift, but as recognition. You earned it, not through obedience, but through brilliance." Tears blurred my vision now. I didn't wipe them away. "Don't let them tell you this was about money. This was about truth. You are my legacy, and no one else has the right to shape your future." Mr. Hayward folded the letter. And that was it. Except it wasn't. My dad cleared his throat. "We'll contest this. A barn that's not a legacy. That's a distraction. And the money, Vanessa had plans. We made plans. For her, I asked, what about mine? Or did I stop existing the moment I started making you uncomfortable?" My mom shook her head. "You're still our daughter." "No," Nana said. "You don't get to say that." She stood, her frame small, but her presence enormous. "You manipulated a dying man. You erased his granddaughter. And you expected to walk in here and collect checks. Her voice dropped lower, but somehow got louder. Get out. No one moved. So she pointed. Now, Vanessa started to protest, but stopped. She looked at my father. He looked at my mother. My mother looked at the floor. They left. No dramatic exits, no threats, just the soft click of the front door closing behind them. I stood in the stillness that followed like something sacred had finally been reclaimed. The silence after they left didn't feel empty. It felt earned, like a breath held too long finally let go. Nana stood for a while by the window, her hands still clenched into small fists even though the fight was over. Or at least this round was. Outside, the late afternoon sun was sliding behind the orchard trees, casting long, amber shadows on the porch. Let's eat, she finally said without turning. She moved to the kitchen, started heating leftover chili without asking if I was hungry. She didn't need to. I hadn't eaten all day. We sat at the same table I used to color on as a kid. The same place Grandpa taught me how to fold paper cranes with diagrams he scribbled in the margins of seed catalogs. We ate in silence for a while. The kind of silence that holds more comfort than words. When I finished my bowl, she poured us both tea and set 2 oatmeal cookies between us as if nothing monumental had just happened in the living room. I hope you'll open the barn tomorrow, she said, voice gentle now. It's all yours. Has been for a while. I didn't even know he was building something, I said. Nobody told me. She sipped slowly. He didn't want them to know. Said it was better that way. Safe. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling fan slowly spinning overhead. All those years, I thought I was overreacting. That maybe I was just being dramatic. No, she said firmly. You were surviving. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The next morning was colder than I expected. Fall had crept in quietly overnight. I found an old flannel of Grandpa's on the coat hook by the back door. It still smelled like cedar and something faintly metallic like the inside of his toolbox. The barn sat on the edge of the property past the apple trees next to the dry creek bed. I remembered it as a dusty old place that used to house broken lawnmowers and spider webs. But when I reached it now, the heavy doors looked freshly stained. There was a new lock, the kind that needed a code. I typed it in. My birthday. The soft click of the door unlocking felt like permission. Inside, I froze. Gone were the rusted shelves and mouse nests. In their place was a lab, real, working, clean, organized. Stainless steel counters. Shelving stacked with beakers, soil samples, microscopes. There were solar panels on the roof, and inside a portable climate chamber for seed testing. A row of computers lined one wall each, labeled with sticky notes in Grandpa's tidy block letters. In the center of the room, on a large corkboard, were pinned sketches of irrigation layouts, adaptive crop rotations, pest-resistant companion planting designs. And in the corner, an old black filing cabinet. I opened the top drawer. Blueprints, notes, patent drafts. The next drawer, receipts, supply lists, spreadsheets, tracking water efficiency. And then the bottom drawer, a small safe. I knew the code for this too, his wedding anniversary. I hadn't forgotten. Inside were 3 things. A USB drive. A stack of photos, me mostly working in the garden, holding trophies asleep on the porch with a book across my chest. And a notebook. The same kind he used to carry in his pocket. On the first page, in thick black ink, he had written, "She will build what they tried to bury." I sat down hard on the stool near the microscope table and just breathed. It wasn't a gift. It was a foundation. All the years I thought I was invisible. He had been watching, preparing, investing in me like a quiet rebellion against everything my parents had tried to silence. I thought about the time I asked for a science kit and got a pink jewelry box instead. The time I won my regional biology fair and my dad said, "That's nice, but Vanessa just got cast as Juliet." The time my mother told me not to wear my NASA shirt to family brunch because it made me too intense. This barn was the opposite of all that. It was a place where being too much was exactly enough. I spent the rest of the day cataloging what he'd left behind. The USB drive had drafts of grant applications, partnership proposals, even early-stage designs for a regenerative greenhouse system. He had started filing for nonprofit status before he got sick. He named it the Alder Initiative. a play on our last name, but also a nod to the alder tree, one of the few species that enriches the soil it grows in. My throat tightened when I read that. He'd chosen a name that meant restoration. He believed this would outlive him. I didn't know what to feel. Gratitude didn't even begin to cover it. Grief, maybe. Guilt. Rage. All of it tangled up and pulsing under my skin like electricity. I texted Micah and Tara, my two closest friends from university. Sent a few photos, didn't explain much. Just, he left me this. I think I know what I'm supposed to do now. Micah replied immediately, "We're in." Tara followed on a scale of 1 to Nobel Prize. "How serious are we talking?" I sent back a picture of the climate chamber. She sent 010. "Got it, we'll be there this weekend." That night, I sat on the porch swing with Nana. The stars were starting to peek through the dusk, and the wind had picked up, setting the chimes dancing again. "I don't think I ever thanked him properly," I said. "You did," she answered. "Every time you kept going, you thanked him. Every time you didn't shrink." I looked over at her. "What if I don't know how to run all of this? What if I fail?" "You won't," she said. "But even if you do, it'll be yours to learn from." I nodded, not fully convinced, but not scared either. Not anymore. We sat like that until the sky turned dark and the air got too cool for sitting still. Before we went inside, Nana touched my arm. "Your parents might come back, you know, or try to." I didn't even hesitate. I'm not the same girl they walked over. Her eyes twinkled. "I know." She held the door open for me, and I stepped inside the house where everything had started carrying with me the weight of all that had tried to end me. Except now I knew the truth. I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been protected. And tomorrow I'd start building what they never believed I could. 3 days later, the sound of gravel crunching beneath tires broke the early stillness. Nana was in the kitchen humming while slicing apples. I was in the barn trying to get the old climate chamber calibrated again. The beeping sensors and faint click of the door opening reminded me of a heartbeat slow, steady, alive. When I stepped outside, I saw Micah's hatchback pull up first. Dust swirled in its wake. He stepped out in worn jeans, carrying a duffel that looked like it had survived 3 dorms and 2 internships. Tara's car wasn't far behind her trunk, stuffed with boxes labeled test kits, LED modules, and for some reason, cookies emergency. They didn't say much at first. Just hugged me like we had always known this moment was coming. Inside the barn, they moved like people who had been waiting for a reason to say yes to something bigger. Micah unpacked tools, immediately checking the wiring setup Grandpa left. Tara set up her tablet on the main counter and started scanning the system for code compatibility. "I don't think your grandfather was just building a lab," Tara said, glancing around. "This looks like the start of a prototype campus." Micah grinned. He was 10 years ahead, minimum. I watched them work, something stirring in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time, hope maybe. Or grounding. It felt like the first time I belonged without shrinking to fit. That night, we sat on the porch, wrapped in wool blankets, passing around mugs of hot cider. Nana joined us for a bit, her hands folded, eyes thoughtful. "You know, she said he wanted this to be a seed, not a shelter." "What do you mean?" Micah asked. She looked toward the orchard, the trees just beginning to shed their leaves. "He didn't build it to hide her," she said softly. "He built it to plant something the rest of them couldn't uproot." I said nothing, but I understood. Over the next few weeks, we fell into rhythm. Every day started with black coffee and scribbled to-do lists taped to the fridge. The barn buzzed with energy testing soil sensors, setting up aquaponics, reviewing grant guidelines. My hands were constantly ink-stained or smudged with graphite from sketching new system diagrams. Sometimes I'd find little notes Grandpa left behind in the most random places, tucked into drawers taped to the underside of shelves. One said, "If they laugh, you're on the right path." Another read invention is grief turned into blueprint. He had known the weight I would carry, and he'd done what no one else had prepared the ground for me to grow in. But not everything stayed quiet. About a month in, Nana got a letter in the mail, thick envelope, no return address. The handwriting, though, was unmistakable my mother's. She handed it to me without saying anything. Just raised one eyebrow like, "Your call, kid." I stared at it on my desk for a week, left it unopened between lab notebooks and nutrient charts. But eventually, curiosity broke past principle. Inside were 3 pages. The first was covered in excuses, stress, miscommunication, how hard things had been. The second was full of half apologies dressed up as reflections. Phrases like, "If I hurt you and we were trying our best." But the third page, that was the real message. She wanted a meeting. We'd like to visit the property, she wrote. To talk, to understand. We miss you. I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. They'd spent years making sure I disappeared, and now that I had something they couldn't control, they wanted to understand. I left the letter on the kitchen counter. Nana read it silently, then slid it back to me. Your choice, she said. But I'll say this. Ghosts don't just haunt houses. They haunt unfinished business too. I agreed to meet them. Not because I wanted peace, but because I wanted clarity. We met in town, neutral ground. A coffee shop just off Main Street, bright lighting, too many witnesses for theatrics. They were already seated when I walked in. Vanessa looked the same put-together designer coat, flawless hair. My mother smiled like nothing had happened. My father gave a polite nod as if this were a quarterly check-in. Hi, sweetheart, my mom said, standing slightly. I didn't hug her, just sat down. Thanks for meeting us, she said, smoothing her napkin like it held the conversation together. We've been thinking about everything that happened. I tilted my head. What exactly happened? Just so we're clear. Dad jumped in. Things got messy. Emotions were high. We didn't always say the right things. You told people I cut off contact because I was ashamed of you, I said calmly. You told my grandfather I didn't care. And you sent me to an empty church on the day of his funeral. Mom flinched. We thought it was best, she whispered. For who, I asked. Vanessa finally spoke. You think you're better than us now. Just admit it. You love playing the victim. I leaned forward slightly. Not angry, just done. I never wanted to be better. I wanted to be seen. You couldn't even manage that. She rolled her eyes. You always make everything about you. That's because you made sure no one else would. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I stood, reached into my coat pocket, placed something on the table. It was a photograph. Me and Grandpa kneeling in the garden, both grinning dirt under our nails. He was showing me how to graft branches. On the back, he'd written, "Legacy isn't blood. It's what you choose to grow." I don't need you to understand, I said, tapping the photo once. I just needed to stop letting your silence define me. I walked out without waiting for a reply. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt clear. The next day, I got a call from the grant board. We'd been shortlisted for funding national scale. If we made it through the next phase, we'd receive enough to expand the lab hire staff and launch our pilot program in drought-hit counties. I told Micah and Tara over dinner, and they both screamed. We celebrated with lemon bars and old music from Nana's record player. That night, I sat in the barn alone, lights dimmed low. I opened Grandpa's notebook again. Toward the back, in smaller handwriting, he had written, "Some people build walls. You build bridges. That's why they fear you." And suddenly I didn't feel afraid anymore. Not of failing, not of them, not of being too much. I wasn't haunted. I was rooted. The first frost came early that year. We woke one morning to see the orchard glinting like it had been brushed with silver. Leaves curled in on themselves. The grass crunched underfoot. And still the barn lights flickered on at dawn. Inside, the heater groaned as it kicked on. Our breath puffed out in clouds until the room warmed, and even then we wore sweaters over sweaters. Progress didn't care about temperature, neither did purpose. Tara had just finished setting up the seed viability tests. Micah was rebuilding a faulty pump in the aquaponics unit. I was drafting an update to the grant committee. Every keystroke felt like a small declaration, we're still here. By noon, the delivery truck arrived 10 crates of materials we never could have afforded without the initial grant installment. Solar insulation, programmable grow lights, filtration membranes. I signed for them with a pen that kept skipping ink, but I didn't care. I was signing into something real, into something we built without apology. That afternoon, I found myself walking the edge of the property line. Just past the west fence was a patch of overgrown brush and red clay barren, cracked, the kind of soil that never seemed to hold anything longer than a week. I remembered trying to grow sunflowers there once. They'd sprouted and died before I could name them. But something pulled me there now. I brought a trowel and a mason jar, knelt at the edge, and dug slowly. The dirt was just as stubborn as I remembered. dry, sullen. But deeper down, it was cooler, damp. I took a sample and brought it back to the barn, running it through the new composition scanner. The results flashed up on the monitor: high salinity, low nitrogen, but surprisingly moderate organic matter. It wasn't dead, it was tired. That night, I sketched out a plan. New compost layers, mycorrhizal networks, mulch insulation. And at the center, a wild idea Grandpa once scribbled in his journal about reviving exhausted Earth using native plants and lunar cycles. He always said the land listens, but it doesn't always speak first. Maybe now it was ready to answer. We spent the next week prepping the field, clearing brush, turning soil, mixing compost with crushed eggshells and coffee grounds. Nana watched from the porch with a blanket around her shoulders and a thermos of mint tea. "You really think this'll grow?" she asked one afternoon as I passed by with a wheelbarrow full of mulch. "I think if it doesn't, it still matters that we tried." She nodded, the kind of nod only people who've lost and kept going can give. We planted wild barley clover and milkweed. Not glamorous, but essential. Crops that didn't ask for much but gave a lot back. And we set up sensors to track everything: the moisture, the soil density, the microbial activity. Micah called it the resurrection plot. Tara called it plant magic. I called it homework the Earth left behind. 2 weeks later, while checking the systems, I found an error log on one of the external drives Grandpa had installed. It was buried deep behind a hidden folder labeled only with a date. It was a video file. I clicked. There he was, sitting at the same stool where I now kept my sketch pad. Same dusty beam behind him. Same crooked light bulb swaying overhead. He looked tired, but alert. A small smile tugged at his lips. "If you're watching this," he said, "then I'm not there anymore. Which means you probably found the barn." "Good." He took a breath long and steady. "This place wasn't meant to be a monument. It's a mirror. I built it the way I saw you: practical, a little chaotic, full of life, and never asking for permission to matter." I blinked quickly, already feeling that weight behind my eyes. "You were never too much, Isla. You were the antidote. To them, to small thinking, to fear." He chuckled softly. "I always knew they'd try to bury your light, so I made sure you had your own lamp." The screen flickered slightly. He leaned in, voice lower now. "They won't understand. They'll say you changed. You didn't. You just stopped bending. There's a difference." He reached into his jacket and pulled out something, one of my childhood notebooks. The one I used to hide under my bed. "You gave this to me once when you thought no one cared. But I did. Every single page." He set it on the table. "Whatever you build here, let it grow wild. Let it scare them. Let it make room." The video ended without a goodbye. But I didn't need one. I watched it twice. Then again. When I stepped out of the barn that night, I noticed something. Tiny green shoots no bigger than matchsticks poking up through the edge of the resurrection plot. The Earth had answered. News of our project started spreading. First, a local environmental journal did a write-up. Then a radio station in Albuquerque called. Then a surprise email landed in my inbox from a professor I admired offering a collaboration. Nana called it the whisper, turning into a storm. We built a site, islaadlerlab.org. We didn't make it flashy, just honest. Photos, results, our mission in plain language. Within a month, we had more inquiries than we could respond to. Schools asked for tours. Small-town farmers asked for consultation. Retired engineers offered free hours. One even sent us a box of heirloom seeds labeled for the kids who never fit in. It sat on the front counter like a promise. But not all reactions were welcome. One afternoon, I received an email from my father. Just a line. "You've made your point. Can we talk now?" I didn't reply. Because this was never about making a point. This was about making peace with not being invited to the table and building one anyway. By the end of the season, the plot had changed. It wasn't lush, not yet. But it was living. Breathing. The clover covered the bare patches like a quiet balm. The barley bent in the wind without breaking. And the milkweed had already attracted 3 monarch butterflies, tiny flickers of orange and black dancing in the low sun. Tara cried when she saw the first one. Micah saluted it like a returning soldier. I just stood still, my boots sinking slightly into the soil that once rejected everything. "You okay?" Micah asked. I nodded. "I think so. Feels like the beginning of something," Tara said softly. "No," I said. "This is something." And it was. Not just a project, not just a lab. It was reclamation. Of space, of story, of voice, of legacy not inherited, but built. It's strange how you don't notice growth while it's happening. You water the soil, chase sunlight, fight the frost, and then one day, without warning, something blooms. Not because you forced it, but because you stayed. That's what it felt like the morning I stood in front of the barn, hands covered in dirt, looking out at the field we once called impossible. It wasn't just green now. It was glowing, alive in a way I hadn't known land could be. And somehow I was too. The resurrection plot, our little experiment, wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. Cover crops held their ground. Insects returned. Even the bees came back. I'd catch them floating lazily over the milkweed like tiny blessings in motion. We'd been selected as finalists for a national sustainability grant. Not just funding, but platform. Visibility. The kind of attention that had once made me hide my notebooks under my bed. Now I was preparing to stand on a stage and talk about clover and crop rotation like they were a second language. Tara joked that I needed a new blazer. Micah told me not to memorize my speech too much or I'd sound like a robot. But Nana? She just looked at me the night before I left and said, "Don't speak to impress. Speak like your grandfather would have wanted, clear and true." The auditorium in Denver was brighter than I expected. Too much glass, too many polished shoes. But when I walked onto the stage and saw our slideshow playing in the background, those dirt-smudged hands, the cracked soil, the barley shoots stretching toward sun, I forgot the crowd. I thought of Grandpa's notebook. Let it scare them. So I did. I talked about how legacy isn't measured in applause or inheritance, but in intention. I told them about a forgotten patch of earth and a girl who once thought she had to earn her place by being quiet. I told them about the barn and the whisper of an old man who believed in building instead of begging. And I ended with this. Some seeds grow because you plant them. Others, they grow because no one remembered to stop them. That's what this lab is. What I am. What we all can be. The room stood. Not loud, not forced, just steady. And afterward, a woman from a small tribal council in northern Arizona came up to me and said, "We've been waiting for someone to explain soil like that." My grandmother used to say plants remember pain, but they don't hold it. They just grow around it. I wrote that down. Some things deserve to be kept. The grant came through 2 weeks later. 6 figures. Enough to expand the lab, hire staff, create an education program, and establish remote testing plots. But even bigger than the money was what it signified: recognition. Not from people who tried to shrink me, but from those who saw what I was growing. And slowly other doors opened. We partnered with small towns hit hardest by drought, created low-cost systems farmers could install without complicated tech. We worked with classrooms, letting kids run experiments with water retention kits. We launched a seed library. The Walter Adler Center for Sustainable Learning became more than a name on a grant form. It became a living, working place of reclamation. Still, some things tried to circle back. My mother sent a card the following spring, pale blue, no return address. Just a line inside. "I hear you're doing well. I hope you know we meant no harm." I read it once, then tucked it inside a folder labeled unopened chapters. I wasn't angry anymore. I just had better uses for my time. Vanessa, she posted about our work once. Tagged it with vague captions like, "So proud of the family legacy." Someone forwarded it to me. I didn't respond. I didn't need to reclaim space in their world. I had built one of my own. Nana passed that summer. It was a quiet morning. She'd been sitting on the porch with a mug of cinnamon tea and her favorite fleece blanket. The wind chimes rang once, then stilled. We buried her under the shade of the apple trees. Her name carved into a flat stone, simple and clear, just like her. I read the eulogy, not from notes, just from memory. "I used to think people had to choose between softness and strength," I said, voice steady. But she was both. She didn't shout, she didn't beg, she just stood. And because she stood, I did too. Afterward, we planted echinacea and sage around her grave. She would have liked that. Healing things. The kind that come back every year without asking permission. Months passed. We kept building, kept growing. One afternoon, while organizing the storage closet, I found a box tucked high on the shelf, labeled in Grandpa's handwriting for Isla, when it's time. Inside, there were 4 items. A photo of me at age 10 holding a test tube like it was treasure, a small rusted compass with a broken chain, a folded letter sealed with red wax, and a single sunflower seed inside a cloth pouch. The letter read, "If you're holding this, then I guess it's time. Not because you finished something, but because you stopped apologizing for starting it. This isn't a reward, it's just a reminder. You're not lost, you never were. You just needed a space where you didn't have to shrink. Plant the seed. Wherever it lands, it'll find light." So I did. I planted that seed at the edge of the resurrection plot where the clay was still stubborn but not silent, where roots had learned to navigate old scars. It bloomed in late August, tall, bright, whole. It's been 3 years since then. The barn has doubled in size. We've trained dozens of youth in agrotech. We've been featured in publications I once used to read on my bedroom floor. But more than any headline, more than any award, it's the little things that stay with me. Like the sound of rainwater hitting the tin roof, the way kids light up when their experiments work, or the quiet comfort of sitting at Grandpa's old desk, now mine, and writing notes on how to save a struggling crop. Legacy, I've learned, isn't what you leave behind. It's what you start that refuses to die. And as for me, I never needed their approval. Just sunlight. And somewhere to root. Story 2. My family forbade me to come home for Christmas for a reason, but the party didn't end as they expected. While the city outside glistened with lights and soft melodies flowed through the icy air. It was 3 days before Christmas. One phone call changed my entire world. I had just shrugged out of my bulky winter coat and kicked off my hospital clogs as I entered my little Nashville apartment. A worn-out but sincere smile tugged at my mouth. My beautifully packed luggage was sitting in the corner of the room with a little forest green sweater neatly draped over it, and a number of wrapped items placed by the door like promises. I knew the ingredients for the apple cinnamon bread pudding that my family liked, but I couldn't recall who cooked it. I had also purchased gifts for everyone. I had made a lot of effort to be sufficient and to accomplish things correctly. I didn't give it much attention when my phone rang and I saw Ethan's name flash on the screen. Perhaps he wanted me to plan rides like every other year or bring extra napkins. I could still hear the warmth in my voice. Ethan. Hello. This time, though, his voice was different. Lighter. Nearly practiced. Hello. Listen up, this year Celeste will be attending Christmas. She is quite sensitive to energy and other things related to your work. Everything, even the hospital, might feel a little overwhelming. It could be best for her if you skipped this one, in my opinion. Nothing is personal. I stood there blinking languidly at my little Christmas tree while gazing at the lights. Nothing private. I spoke evenly, but my fists clenched over the phone. All right. Tasting like ash in my mouth, I murmured. My mom phoned an hour later. When she intended anything harsh to seem kind, her voice was soothing as it usually was, similar to covering barbed wire with silk. We just want to make things simple for everyone, honey. You are aware of Celeste's nature. It might be confusing if you come. To be honest, we might not even answer the door if you arrive. That was it. There is no more pretense. With sadness, no invitation was declined. No, they were evicted, encased in politeness. I was unwanted, not just not desired. I did not cry, nor did I yell. I never really belonged at the table, therefore I didn't beg for a place there. I just hung up. Carefully placing the phone on the counter, she gazed at the modest but optimistic stack of wrapped presents beside the entrance. Presents that the people I had devoted my life to attempting to love enough to be noticed would never open. Like someone packing up after an imaginary funeral, I went slowly and methodically. I opened my banking app and plugged in. Assistance for auto loans was stopped, emergency maintenance funds were frozen, mortgages were topped up, and mortgages were canceled. I wasn't upset. I had just finished. I had persuaded myself for years that sacrifice was necessary for love. Being the trustworthy one was sufficient to gain a place at the family table. But as I stood there in the silence with the radiator humming and the aroma of cinnamon from the bread pudding I had made that morning still there, I came to terms with the reality. I never received a formal invitation to join. Until my existence became inconvenient, I was just tolerated. Outside, the first snow started to fall softly and steadily, silently covering the pavement. I felt a sudden calmness descend upon me as I observed it through the glass. Don't try again. I'm done reducing myself to fit into the few areas they provided. No more acting like you're someone you're not. I would not be the one pleading to be allowed in this Christmas, standing at the door with my heart in my palm. I also came to the realization that I didn't have to be growing up for the first time in my life. The fact that some kids were brighter under the same roof while others just kept the lights on was something I used to consider typical. I was the first to be born, the test run. During several evenings of silent disappointment, my father would jest at a barbecue while giving Ethan the larger piece of cake. He was the golden kid, the creative, lovely miracle baby that they had dreamed for. And I was only the first. I recall Ethan using a black permanent marker to draw wild loops and swirls on the walls of the living room, resembling rebellious vines on the beige paint. My parents laughed warmly and indulgently, describing it as expressive. 2 days later, I was too distracted, too serious and irresponsible when I dropped a ball while setting the table. I recall their expressions at the time, how they treated me as though I were a skin-covered responsibility that I would never be able to live up to. Without breaking a beat, I received straight A's in school. While Ethan's participation ribbon sat brightly on the refrigerator for weeks, the report cards were silently put into drawers. I once sent a letter to my guidance counselor requesting assistance with my medical school application, and I put it on the kitchen counter in the ideal location, hoping someone would notice. I was waiting for someone to inquire as to why I required it. Nobody ever did. When the University of North Carolina School of Medicine accepted me. No wait list for the first round. I brought the letter home with me like a prize. "That's intense, honey," my mother replied with a small grin after skimming it. "You must use caution to avoid burning out." She stirred something that would never taste like approval before returning her attention to the burner. They also gave Ethan a reintegration celebration when he left college for the third time, pursuing his ambition of becoming a creative director. Cake with balloons. There is still a framed picture of him with a paintbrush hanging like a shrine in the corridor. For the kid who had not yet established himself, the house, which had never honored my accomplishments virtually, hummed with delight. One of my old sketchbooks was once discovered. Doodles from extended workdays. Under a stack of grocery store flyers, fragments of stories and sunsets were thrown into the recycle bin. They chuckled and claimed to believe it to be scrap paper when I questioned them about it. Perhaps it was for them. Perhaps I was too. Nevertheless, I persisted through residency medical school and many hours spent sitting next to patients. Nobody else desired to sit with them. In those deserted halls, I noticed a mirror, perhaps a quiet connection with those who had sacrificed their lives for others and been forgotten when they were no longer useful at home, which is why I selected geriatrics. I continued to play the same role. Keep quiet, trustworthy, invisible. When the insurance refused to pay for the leaky roof, I had to pay for it myself. I sent additional funds into Ethan's accounts once his freelancing work dwindled. I paid my mother's physical therapy co-pays. When Dad's truck required new brakes, I sent money. I loved them, so I did it. Or perhaps because I still thought that one had to earn love. Something you purchased with sufficient sacrifice. They never thanked the public. They were not obliged to. They didn't express gratitude out loud in their language. Like oxygen, it was taken for granted like duty. As a result, each time I gave them another aspect of me, they accepted it with open arms and closed hearts without ever turning around. Family, I persuaded myself, meant and was recognized as vital. The framework supporting the hopes of all others. I didn't comprehend scaffolding shouldn't bleed for the structure until that night when I heard their nonchalant, courteous, and nasty phone calls. It provides assistance. Growing up just made the pattern more costly. It didn't alter it. Ethan stayed downtown in a loft that my parents helped pay for since he needed inspiration after their roof collapsed following a spring storm, while I moved into my first apartment after residency, a one-bedroom flat with peeling paint and a broken furnace. When their medical expenditures mounted following Dad's operation, I was the one who discreetly sent the funds to the contractor. I submitted checks and worked out payment schedules, but they never even acknowledged them. I wasn't asked to. Nobody had to. Being helpful without being noticed made things simpler. I reminded myself that my worth wasn't being praised and that my job was to catch the pieces that might otherwise break. However, because I was vital, my name was inscribed in invisible writing on every emergency. At midnight, Ethan's automobile battery died. Before the morning frost melted, I purchased a replacement. Physical treatment for my mother is past due. I made my own phone call to the clinic, paid the bills, and made travel arrangements. I paid for the ticket once more when Ethan hastily purchased new photographic gear and was unable to pay for his journey home for Thanksgiving. At the airport, he gave me a hug. Call me the world's greatest sister. And by the next week, the favor had been forgotten and tucked away in the never-ending list of demands they never had to make. Like a ghost in their life's machinery, I continued to put their demands before of myself. I'm gently removing my own fingerprints while fixing, smoothing, and hiding them. Maintaining my use would have been more difficult if I had been grateful. Perhaps they forgot I was the scaffolding again, so it was better. Since the house's secret beam had never collapsed before, they never considered giving it credit. At the hospital, sometimes late at night after working double shifts, sitting with a cup of tea by the window, I would ponder what it would be like to be seen. Nor as a need, nor as a backup plan, but just as Natalie, a person whose existence was sufficient without needing to earn her the right to keep every family meal, every holiday, and every private issue. However, I've learned over the years to not dwell on wishes for too long. Golden Boy's desires did not pay off debts or change ingrained expectations. They were for children. So, like a sponge that was never meant to leak, I continued to move, to show up, to absorb every insult and every omission. Every year when Christmas arrived. As if by magic, I cooked the apple cinnamon bread pudding that they all adored, carefully wrapped it in foil, and grinned when they said, "Oh, this is just like the one from last year." I made a discreet payment into Ethan's account when he was having trouble paying his rent in between assignments, and I didn't pay any attention to the fact that he only contacted later to boast about a new project. I was on the phone till 2 a.m. when my parents needed assistance with their taxes. Sitting undisturbed on the counter, I walked them through deductions on my own forms that they hardly comprehended. I believed that being in love entailed staying up late, taking every call, and resolving every issue before it became a hassle. I believed that the equation will ultimately balance if I simply put in enough effort and sacrificed enough. At some point, someone would see more in me than just an overstretched safety net. However, I came to terms with the awful reality that evening as I was standing in my tiny kitchen holding a still warm phone. They had never learned how, and I had never made them so. No matter how much I donated, they would never see me. I sat by myself in my poorly lit flat that night when the phone conversation stopped and the phony niceties faded into quiet. Like a memory that would not go away, the aroma of cinnamon was still there in the air. Outside, the city was enveloped in a respectful silence as the snow grew thicker, gentle, and unconcerned. Through the glass window, I saw it fall. The street lamp's lights are fading into halos. I grabbed my phone once again, but not to give them a call. Not to reason, not to fight, not to plead. The recognizable blue and white screen flickered to life with a soft beep as I launched my banking app. The $800 monthly mortgage top-up that had subtly prevented their home from going into default was canceled. Lost. Fund for emergency maintenance is locked. No more rescues on wet days. Assistance for auto loans was discontinued. Next winter, Ethan's new battery would be his own concern. At first, it felt robotic when I pressed buttons to turn off automated payments that had long been a part of my daily routine, such as paying my own rent or cleaning my teeth. But like a bird expanding its wings for the first time in a cage that was unintentionally left open, a curious lightness unfolded inside me with every cancellation and intentional act of removal. I took out a notepad and wrote down all of the silent debts I had taken on over the years: the airline tickets, the medical bills, the late-night wire transfers, the unceremony-free resolutions of the whispered emergencies. I gazed at the list until the writing became hazy, not from tears but from a depth and age of anguish that had solidified into something quite pristine. I wasn't upset, not in the manner in which they would subsequently charge me. For the first time, I was just awake. They wouldn't immediately notice. The problem with being the unseen scaffolding is that nobody understands that you are supporting the entire dang ceiling until you are gone. Until the last notice came, the missing mortgage payment wouldn't hurt. Not until the pipes broke again in January will the forgotten rainy day savings matter. This time, there wouldn't be a gentle landing sewn together by my hands, but Ethan's gigs would still flutter and fall as usual. I kept it a secret. No heated text messages, no great pronouncements, no postings on social media that are laced with ambiguous melancholy. The one family member who continued to send me birthday cards with handwritten comments, Aunt Lillian, was the only one I didn't inform. I just silently, fully withdrew. The holiday greeting I had partially written earlier that day was erased, the one wishing a happy and nice Christmas to everybody. I disconnected the tree. I returned the wrapped presents to the closet. Their happy paper seemed odd and gaudy in contrast to my newfound resolve. I refrained from crying. I didn't even think I had to. The space that has opened up inside of me had no room for sadness, just clarity. I came to the realization that love shouldn't seem like a continuous show for a non-applauding audience. A family shouldn't be a ledger where making sacrifice after sacrifice until nothing is left to offer is the price of joining. I had spent years thinking that I could win a spot that should have been mine without a doubt if I just put in enough effort, remained modest, and smiled broadly enough. However, love isn't love at all if it requires your quiet. Family isn't family if they simply accept your usefulness. It's a deal. Somewhere across town, my family departed and organized a Christmas celebration when I was no longer willing to pay into the snow that had grown outside and was shrouding the entire world in a new, uncaring silence. I wasn't asked. They thought that without me, Christmas would be lighter. I gave it to them. I allowed them to use the carefully crafted illusion as the foundation for their celebration. The hefty one, the one where I was the issue. The annoying reminder that beauty isn't always pure. I didn't show up for the first time in my life. By doing this, I was able to recover something that I had not even recognized I had lost. The dawn of Christmas was gloomy and gentle. There was a thick quiet over the outer world that seemed to sink into my bones. I had a mug of tea in my hands while I sat by the window. From the steam came the subtle aroma of cinnamon and apple. A bittersweet, somehow empty feeling. In the corner, the presents I had wrapped with such care remained unopened. Careful ribbons and bright paper teased me with their misguided optimism. The tree wasn't lit by me. The Christmas playlist, which typically played softly in the background, was not activated. I made no phone calls. I just sat there covered in a blanket that still had a little scent of fabric softener and rosemary, looking out at a world that for once mirrored how I felt on the inside, silent, chilly, and painfully motionless. Nevertheless, there was no sorrow, no sobs lurking under the surface crying at me. All that was present was an odd silence, almost hallowed, the sort that leaves the air so well cleaned after a storm. It wasn't until it was gone that I understood how much noise I had been carrying. Time passed slowly throughout the day. Without the typical barrage of calls and tumultuous background noise from my parents' living room, noon arrived and went. No group shots, no Ethan sharing joyous selfies with Celeste, the family's new favorite. I didn't receive any last-minute texts requesting Venmo money, since the ham turned out to be more costly than they had anticipated. Nothing but quiet. My phone didn't beep once, twice, and then 3 times in quick succession until the sun had sunk low below the hills, leaving the sky a deep violet hue. I initially thought it was a group discussion that I had neglected to silence, but then a message appeared. "Aunt Lillian, are you able to respond? You've already caused enough harm." The words burned like a flaming indictment into my retinas, making my stomach plummet. Injury. What harm? I couldn't really comprehend it because I hadn't been there before. As soon as Lillian's name appeared on the screen, my phone rang once again. With a scratchy voice from lack of usage, I replied. "What took place?" I inquired. She said softly, like a person walking up to a wounded animal cautious. She said, "They're saying you ruined Christmas. However, you weren't even present." Stunted into stillness, I blinked. I wasn't even invited, so how could I have wrecked it? In what way might being present be more disruptive than being absent? After a pause, Aunt Lillian resumed assembling the narrative in halting, fragmented sentences. Celeste had apparently wandered around the house after dinner, sipping a glass of wine while looking at the old family pictures that are arranged on the mantel. She had recognized me when she saw a faded photo of me from a birthday celebration years ago, grinning clumsily in a too large sweater. Dr. Natalie Hartman is that person. Over the low hum of post-dinner chatter, she had spoken out loud. "Aunt Lillian says she saved my grandmother's life." Suddenly, there was silence in the room. Fawkes died in the middle of his breath, frozen halfway to his mouth's laughter. The next few moments were a blur. Half-true mutterings, uncomfortable looks, and a tension that could choke you. Celeste inquired as to whether I was the sister they frequently discussed, and based on her response, she discreetly gathered her belongings. I give my parents a firm thank you and walk out without saying anything more. The fallout had already started when Lillian called me. Celeste shared something on the internet that was genuine and unvarnished, and it began to reverberate through the tenuous web of relationships my family had built over the years around Ethan's nascent artistic career. I was not yet fully informed. I didn't have to. It was exactly what I could imagine. Jokes about me being too intense were whispered, the careless brutality masquerading as worry. The way they turned my whole life into a warning about loneliness and ambition. For once, someone else had been listening, even though it wasn't new. Someone who had actually seen me and wasn't brought up to think that brutality was the only way families loved me. Through the vivid recollection of an instance in which compassion had been more important than appearance, rather than through the warped prism of bitterness and shame. Sitting in the growing silence that night, I came to what may have been the most profound realization of my life. Sometimes the most profound revenge isn't slamming doors or shouting truths no one wants to hear. Sometimes it's simply stepping away and letting the truth echo in the silence you leave behind. The day after Christmas, the desperation started leaking through the cracks. It began with an email subject line. "Let's reset things," as if years of erasure and dismissal could be wiped clean with a clever title. It was signed not just by my mother or father individually, but by both of them and Ethan too, as if presenting a united front would somehow erase the fracture they had spent decades carving. I opened it with the clinical detachment I reserved for the worst patient notes. The ones who knew were a disaster before you even read them. They made no apologies. Not at all. There were words about heightened emotions, about misunderstandings, about how much they valued family in that careful Polish language that says everything and means nothing. Buried halfway down the 4th paragraph was the real reason for the sudden olive branch. They wanted me to reach out to Celeste to clarify things to smooth it over, to safeguard Ethan's reputation in the art circles she was associated to in New York. It wasn't about me. It was never about me. It was about the repercussions, the chaos. I hadn't even made the mirrors shattering under the weight of their own reflection. They hadn't suddenly realized they had abused me. They had just concluded the cost of such abuse had climbed higher than they were prepared to pay. I didn't respond. My phone buzzed once more that evening. This time, A came from the hospital administrator, someone I had met only once at a charity dinner, a man with nice eyes and a solid handshake. He made a clumsy apology, said that my father had called voiced worries about my mental stability and hinted that I could be having difficulties and should use some time off. Cold wrath, the type that crystallizes sharp and cutting but doesn't erupt, made my face flush. Once joking that I was too serious for my own good, my father was now using my seriousness as a weapon against me. He felt it would terrify me into cooperation, not because he believed it. The damage was evident, but fortunately, the administrator saw through it. They had no intention of repairing anything. They were attempting to control me in the only way they knew how, by discrediting me, by bringing back my grin when it didn't work. The following wave arrived in the form of well-crafted half-truths and group texts to extended relatives portraying me as unstable alone and currently battling with certain issues. Nothing about not being invited to Christmas. The years of quiet sacrifice are not mentioned. Just a low-key campaign of rumors meant to undermine confidence before I had a chance to speak. I received a message from a relative I hadn't spoken to in 5 years with a happy emoji at the end offering a yoga getaway certificate in case you're feeling stressed. The word was not overwhelmed. Every little deception and every effort at manipulation disguised in words of compassion simply served to reinforce what I had already started to realize. I wasn't the reason they were arguing. They were battling for the self-image they had created for themselves. The family who loved and admired Ethan for his intelligence. Their appearances were maintained at all costs, and I was the obedient, reserved sister who never caused a stir. However, I had finished preserving them. Outside my window, I observed the snow still falling. Behind me, every flake erases a new remnant of the road. And for the first time, I didn't feel compelled to defend my version of events or offer an explanation. I was aware of the reality, and perhaps just possibly that was sufficient in the end. Emails and rumors weren't the end of it. With those who think they are entitled to your quiet, it never works. At my door, the following step was subtly wrapped in the comforting warmth of my mother's voice. The Sunday afternoon was calm, one of those winter days when the chill appears to be pressing like a live thing on the windows. I heard a faint, almost hesitant knock while I was organizing patient notes at my desk, a mug of lukewarm tea neglected next to me. At first, I didn't move. The only sound I heard was my own heartbeat, steady and composed. Then I got up, sauntered to the entrance, and peered through the crowd. My father, mother, and Ethan were standing clumsily on the front step, coats bundled up and fake grins, a desperate depiction of a family. I was slow to open the door. I was not afraid, just a kind of disinterested melancholy. It's the same feeling you get when you finally see that the rescue ship you've been hoping for is only a mirage. I slightly opened the door to allow the cold to enter, but not enough to let them in. My mom was the first to speak. Her tone was deliberately adjusted to sound soft. She clutched her handbag like a lifeline and whispered, "We just want to talk." I remained still. I didn't nod. I ultimately realized they weren't there for me, so I didn't become any softer. They were there for the part of me that still believed that love might be exchanged for the girl who would shrink herself into the confined places they permitted. This was no longer the residence of the girl. Between us, there was a thick, brittle quiet. I noticed my father's eyes flash with frustration. Ethan's weight shifting from foot to foot as if he wished to go somewhere else. They didn't feel comfortable. Excellent. I finally spoke the one word I needed to say after a long pause. No. No reopening of wounds, no negotiating, no explanations. They had never made an effort to recover. My mom's face fell flat, part offense, part perplexity, as though she was still in shock that the sturdy scaffolding she had relied upon for so long had just moved aside. I quietly shut the door, locking it on the other side without slamming it or creating a scene. I didn't pay attention when I heard their muffled voices rising first in pleading, then in frustration. The silence fell across the room like a balm as I made my way back to my desk, sat down, and put my hands around my now cold tea. Beside my computer was Celeste's framed letter. At the corners, where she had pressed too hard while writing the ink, was still a little smudged. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the pressure of expectations on my chest when I looked at it. I reflected on the years I had spent trying to gain acceptance in a family that only ever evaluated me based on how I didn't fit their ideal of themselves. I reflected on all the times I had swallowed my own suffering to ease their discomfort. Each time, in order to spare them from feeling the icy water below, I had constructed a bridge out of my own brokenness. And I considered the reality, the one from which I had last ceased to flee. I wasn't made to be practical. I wasn't made to be a sponge for their failures or a mirror for their pride. I was something different. And perhaps just possibly that was sufficient in the end. They did not immediately go. I could hear the faint scrape of shoes on the doorstep, the quiet hum of rushed speech, and the hint of desperation in their voices. Lighter and seemingly remorseful, my mother knocked again. "Please, Natalie. All we want to do is chat." However, I remained sat at my desk. Celeste's framed letter, a silent bulwark in the escalating tempest. I sipped my cold tea and enjoyed its bitter flavor. I waited till the knocking subsided into quiet. I realized for the first time that it wasn't always necessary to reopen the door in order to forgive. Sometimes that meant not doing it. You eventually erected a wall of self-respect rather than rage, even if it meant remaining still while the individuals who had wronged you wore themselves out against the wall. Minutes went by, perhaps more time. After a while, I heard footsteps move away, the gentle clatter of automobile doors shutting, the engine's deep roar as it started. They had vanished, denied but not beaten. I gently got up and moved to the window, lowering the curtain just enough to catch a glimpse of their car's rear as it vanished down the snow-covered street. I didn't feel the need to chase after them. I don't feel the need to call them back. Rather, a profound, resonating calmness settled into my bones. The sort of tranquility that only arises when you quit pleading for a place at a table that was never intended for you. I turned away from the window and walked through my tiny, silent apartment with a steadiness I didn't realize I had. The lighted Christmas tree in the corner was no longer dejected. The unopened presents were arranged in a tidy stack, not as a sign of rejection, but rather as proof that I had made an effort and loved as best I could, that I was successful. They just hadn't realized what they were getting. The steam rose in leisurely spirals as I poured myself another cup of tea, this time stronger. I reseated myself at my desk and pulled the blanket tightly about my shoulders. The edge of the light fell on Celeste's letter. The penmanship is confident and steady. You had an impact. She had written. You persisted. You gave her a sense of importance. I delicately touched the frame with my fingertips, enjoying the coolness of the glass and the faint ridges in the wood. Tangible reminders that you are valuable even if those closest to you don't agree. Someone else will. Someone sincere. Someone listening. I reflected on all the years I had spent attempting to fit into a mold that was never intended for me, shrinking myself into ever tinier forms. I reflected on how I had confused patience with love, the weariness and the never-ending pursuit of attachment. And I reflected about when I had shut the door, with finality, not with anger or resentment. It wasn't mean. Clarity was the key. It wasn't because they liked me that they had come. They needed me, which is why they had come. I needed to fill in the gaps with the calm, obedient self. They wouldn't admit it. However, that girl had left. She was replaced by a lady who saw that it is not your responsibility to complete someone, regardless of how much you love them. You have no need to sacrifice yourself for their comfort. Staying damaged so others may feel whole is not your fate. As I sat there, the snow kept falling outside, covering the entire landscape in pristine white, and I knew I was free, perhaps for the first time. The days were as leisurely and oddly gentle as the first. After a prolonged period of strain, deep breaths are eventually released. I returned to my job. I went around the medical facility. I sat with patients whose families continued to visit and with patients whose families had ceased coming for a while. I paid attention. I remained. I completed the important work. No one ever hosted a celebration honoring the work. A little gift showed up at my door one day. No address for return. Just the delicate, slanted calligraphy of my name. I carefully opened it, removing the brown wrapper to find a letter nestled inside heavy stationery in the color ivory. The corners of the ink were a little smeared, a personal touch in a world that was too polished most of the time. Celeste sent it. She wrote of her grandma who continued to walk to the farmer's market every Saturday morning and practice yoga twice a week. When the world had quietly begun to give up on an elderly woman with failing kidneys and a waning spirit years ago, she wrote about a doctor who sat by her bedside long after visiting hours ended, and who treated her not as a burden, but as a person who was still capable of joy and deserving of dignity. Celeste wrote, "You didn't just save her life. It was you that reminded her that she was alive." I traced the words with my fingers as though I were attempting to carve them into my flesh while I read the letter twice and then a third time. That evening, I framed it and hung it over my desk so it would be illuminated by the morning light. A tiny, silent reminder of the reality I had nearly forgotten. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't hefty. I wasn't too much. I was just who I was meant to be. And my value was never determined by those who were unable to perceive that. I didn't feel the need to defend my limits or give an explanation for myself for the first time in as long as I could remember. To express regret for the way my life has turned out. I had no acquaintances. A ticket to enter my life. Not even the people who used to get the finest and first seats. Another email, less formal, more urgent and more revealing, came in a few weeks later. The family had been pleading with me for years to smooth out shrink and quiet myself for their comfort, and this was their last effort. It started with the standard phrases. "You are missed. We had no intention of hurting you. Can we begin again?" Buried close at the end. Like a splinter they were unable to conceal. That was the true appeal. Kindly request that Celeste remove her post. Ethan is having trouble finding a job. His future is now being impacted. Not a repentance or a reckoning, just another deal. They thought I owed them another loan. I didn't answer. Not all bridges are intended for reconstruction. There are some doors that are better left closed. Respect for the person you've worked so hard to become, not rage. That evening, as I sat at my desk organizing patient notes, the sun sank below my window, illuminating the letter from Celeste with long, golden striations. I closed my eyes, reclined in my chair, and felt whole for the first time in years. I stopped requesting permission to believe it myself, not because someone else finally told me I mattered. Therefore, to everyone who has ever experienced being made to feel invisible by those who are meant to see you first, to everyone who has received too many, too important, or too inconvenient calls. Let me explain. They'll never say, "You don't have too much." You have never had to compromise who you are in order to fit into someone else's flawed narrative, and you are not a burden. Compose your own. And if you felt something after reading this narrative, know this: if you've ever sat in the silence after being excluded and felt more liberated than before, not showing up at all is sometimes the most effective thing you can do.